Hello all, and welcome to something new for the channel. When we started this channel, the point was to share our passion for TTRPGs and storytelling. And while I think we've definitely won a few of you over with our conversion of many of pop culture's most famous fictional characters, I think most of you would agree that good characters alone do not a good story make. And as many of this channel's eagle-eyed viewers have also probably guessed by now, we consider ourselves anime enthusiasts. So today, we are going to combine those two passions by going through the One Piece anime and trying to dissect some of the lessons that we can learn and carry over to help us become the best DMs we can be. Full disclosure, I am mostly a Pathfinder DM with a bit of D&D 5e sprinkled in there for flavor, so a lot of my points are going to be tailored to those systems. But seeing as most of this advice is about storytelling in general, it should be pretty system agnostic. In fact, I think with a little bit of tweaking, you could probably use this advice for any storytelling, from TTRPGs to writing your own novels. So beware of spoilers, and without further ado, let's get started. But seeing as most of this advice is about storytelling in general, it should be pretty system agnostic. In fact, I think with a little bit of tweaking, you could probably use this advice for any storytelling, from TTRPGs to writing your own novels. So beware of spoilers, and without further ado, let's get started.
I'm Luffy, the man who's gonna be king of the pirates!
And stop. Okay, I promise I won't be stopping this frequently throughout the entire episode, but I do think we have already stumbled upon our first lesson. Where you start your campaign matters. I'm sure most of you by now have heard the meme that all D&D campaigns start in a tavern, and that definitely has a lot of credence to it. I myself have been guilty of starting campaigns in a tavern simply because I have no idea where else to put them. And Critical Role, one of the biggest D&D streamers around, has started not just their second campaign in a tavern, but also their animated series, The Legends of Vox Machina. Taverns are a pretty common starting place, and I think it's not too difficult to see why. If you're running your first session of a new campaign, and your players don't know each other already, it's really easy to just put them in a tavern, because everyone needs a place to sleep and a place to eat, and just have them run into each other. Now don't get me wrong, I am not saying that starting in a tavern is a bad idea and you should never do it. What I am saying is where you choose to start your campaign says a lot about the setting of your world. In One Piece, we open on a passenger cruise ship being raided by the Alvida pirates. Right from the get-go, you see that this is a world where violence on the high seas is not just common, it's expected. From the reaction of the staff, you can see the contingencies have already been put in place for this. No one in the One Piece world goes out onto the high seas without planning for at least the possibility of being raided by pirates. By choosing to open on this scene, you're not just telling your players that your campaign has a lot of pirates in it. You're showing them firsthand that the oceans are not a safe place and they should be expecting the unexpected. Players have the memories of goldfish. If you tell them something is going to happen and a couple of sessions go by and you haven't fulfilled that promise, they're going to forget that you said it at all. And when it does happen, they're going to be caught completely unexpected. By starting the campaign mid-pirate raid, you send a very clear note to your players that this is something that's common and you just kind of have to live with it. On the other hand, if you do choose to start your campaign in just a typical tavern, you can use that to your advantage. You can use a tavern to call to mind a typical high fantasy setting, like the Sword Coast or Exandria, or, with a little planning, you can use that tavern to subvert the world that your players live in. Maybe start your campaign in a world where the region is under the rule of a vampire lord. Instead of the normal jovial atmosphere of an evening at the tavern, you could describe that the otherwise popular tavern clears out as the sun sets, and no one wants to risk running into the vampire enforcers that the lord has patrolled the streets at night. And when one of your players goes to order a drink or food, have that bartender collect payment, but then, before they give them their food, have the barkeep pull out a knife and a vial, because the vampire lord has enacted a blood tax on all purchased goods within the city. All of a sudden, you've transformed your typical tavern start into a method of delivering information to your players about a world that they're about to be pouring hours of their lives into, and giving them information that they need to go forward in that world. If you do this right, your players won't consciously know that they are being fed important information. They will just roll with the punches and internalize it in a way that they normally wouldn't be able to if you just gave them a document that said, Oh yeah, there's vampires. I have recently started a campaign where the country that the players reside in is constantly under attack by demons, and in order to get from place to place, caravans have to carry special ward stones that protect them not just from monsters, but also from a corruption that has poisoned the very air and begins mutating the bodies of people who stay too long in it without the ward stone's protection. I was running an introductory session for this campaign, and the player in question tried to sneak out of the city without one of these ward stones. Well, technically, she tried to sneak in with a caravan that had a ward stone, but when she got caught, she fled the caravan outside of the ward stone's protection. She immediately started having to deal with the effects of this corruption and quickly find her way to the nearest city so that she didn't succumb to the effects of the corruption. By letting the player experience this firsthand, the corruption went from something that was talked about once to something that the players had to deal with every time they stepped foot outside of a major city. And the next time the players tried to leave the city, they had to charter a nearby caravan that was going the same direction as them so that they could benefit from the protection that that caravan's wardstone had. One of my other players actually made it their goal to collect as many of these wardstones as possible so they could have the freedom to leave the city whenever they felt like it. Alright, but that's enough on the first opening frame of the episode. Let's try to get into some of our actual players, shall we? And speaking of our players, let's talk about Luffy for a second. Over on the channel Overanalyzing Avatar, check it out if you haven't seen it by the way, it's really fun if you like looking way too deeply into kids shows. One of the first things they look at when a new character is introduced is what the first lines of dialogue that character gets to speak, and what it tells you about the character. Luffy's first line of dialogue is "I slept so great," while bursting out of a barrel that some pirates were about to break open. From these 4 words said, we have already learned so much about Luffy without having to be told anything. From just this one line of dialogue, we know that Luffy is incredibly hyperactive and incredibly hyper-focused on what he wants in the moment. He doesn't care that he's on a ship being raided by pirates. He doesn't know. He wants food. And he doesn't care about people constantly telling him that he should be afraid because, like I said, he wants food. Luffy strikes me as a very particular type of PC. Luffy, to me, is the epitome of a new player at the game. His only experience with RPGs in the past is from video games. He skimmed the GM's World Anvil page, thought, that's too much for me, saw the words King of the Pirates, and said, well, I guess I'll make that my goal. It's very important to know that while other players may see this type of player and think, that's a problem player, they're not engaging with the game. Luffy is engaged with the story in the best way that he knows how. If Luffy is a player who has never played a TTRPG before, he may be used to a world that puts on a thin veil of urgency. The Dark Lord is never going to invade while you're on the side quest of Farmer Brown who lost his 10 chickens. That's just not how the worlds of video games work. When a GM encounters these types of players, it's important to meet them where they're at. Don't come to the table with preset expectations that you expect players to just know without having experienced them before. Here, we see that in motion. When Luffy takes a minute to look for food, rather than engaging with the actual pirate raid that's going on the ship, Oda, who is the DM in this case, brings the conflict directly to Luffy to an extent where it's literally impossible for Luffy to ignore it anymore. Luffy's given a little bit of time to roleplay with Kobe, and then all of a sudden, bam, Alvida appears from the ceiling, ready to fight anything and everything in her path. This shatters that veil of urgency that existed before, and once again sends a message to the players that if they don't engage with the plot's still going to happen. Now, it is very important that you hear this next part. Do not use this as an excuse to hit players over the head with the plots that you think they should be engaging in. Clearly, this works best when given some level of communication above the table that clearly we're not going to be able to see within the world of One Piece. There is a fine line between making the world that the players are playing in feel alive and like it would go on even without the players being there, and making the players feel like their choices don't actually matter. In this situation, Luffy wasn't really making a choice. And that's why in this situation, Luffy strikes me as a new player. He doesn't know what his choices are. So instead of just letting Luffy sit there in analysis paralysis, the DM stepped in and continued on with the storytelling as it needed to be done. However, that's just one interpretation of Luffy's character. There is another type of player that Luffy fits down to a T, and that's a player with a very specific power fantasy. We all live in the real world. We all have to pay bills and have zero control over how our countries are ran at the top levels, and for some of us, TTRPGs are an escape from that world. They let you imagine a world where you were so strong you could solve the problems that you face, that everyone in the world faces, with a single punch. Or in Luffy's case, live in a world where the problems presented can be ignored until you get around to fixing them. And if that's the interpretation you want to use for this scene, I think the DM would be doing an even better job of giving Luffy the experience he's looking for. Luffy is able to take out 3 presumably combat trained pirates by simply waking up, and then is able to solve the problems that face not just him, but every non-pirate on the ship with little to no difficulty. I don't know about you, but if I were a player who just single-handedly took out a pirate crew all before lunch, I would feel pretty powerful. Regardless of how you want to interpret this episode from the lens of a TTRPG, it's a perfect example of the DM knowing what kind of experience his player wants and delivering that experience, which is kind of the job of the DM. Now, don't get me wrong, you are still a player at the table too. It is important if you're DMing that you are thinking of your own fun just as much as everyone else's, and not putting any one player's fun over anyone else's. If you want a world that feels a little bit more gritty and realistic, One Piece is definitely not the campaign world that you would want to play in. Too many times this world operates on what would be the funniest thing to happen, or who is the most powerful person in the room, and that's just not power dynamics that carry over into the real world. Finding what works for you and your table is the key to making this game run as well as it does. Alright, so Luffy is able to find food and have a conversation with Kobe. This is the first true and proper NPC in this world, so let's take a look at how Oda chooses to characterize him. Kobe is immediately presented as a foil to Luffy in almost every way. Luffy is fearless. Kobe is afraid of his own shadow. Luffy is powerful. Kobe is small in both stature and power. Luffy seemingly operates on zero thought, while Kobe gets decision paralysis figuring out which shoe to put on first. Kobe is a perfect NPC for this situation, because he is able to deliver information to Luffy about how bad his situation is, while not sending Luffy's player into analysis paralysis. Kobe can say that things are grim, but because it's coming from Kobe, it's unlikely to change a player's actions because, well, let's be honest, it's Kobe. He probably waits a day and a half to go into water after eating a sandwich to avoid cramps. Of course, there's also the point that Kobe offers Luffy an opportunity to solve problems without using violence. One short interaction with Luffy, a successful diplomacy check, and Luffy has made a positive difference in someone's life forever. Now, usually, I wouldn't rule that a single diplomacy check could turn someone's entire life around in the way that it does for Kobe, but I do think Kobe is a special case here, because once again, if Luffy is a character with a power fantasy, being able to make a difference in someone's life, seemingly on accident, really plays into said power fantasy. Kobe goes on after this conversation to completely turn his life around and start following his dreams, and that is entirely thanks to Luffy. Power fantasies aren't always about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being able to make the most impact. And Luffy being able to make such a positive impact on Kobe without even really trying speaks wonders. This interaction also does something that One Piece doesn't do very often. It solves a problem non-violently. And it's important to know that that's an option, especially when you're dealing with new players. If you don't present players with an NPC that they can talk to and see their viewpoints, and even if ever so slightly change those viewpoints, players will stop seeing your NPCs as anything other than bags of hit points. And that is not what you want for a true, deep storytelling adventure. Well, maybe it is what you want, it's not what I want. Once again, this advice isn't for all tables. If you want a hack and slash adventure where you show up every day and just kill the baddies and your players are okay with that, more power to you. Alright, I think I've rambled on a little bit too long on this one point, so let's move on.
My guess is that you're not Zoro the Pirate Hunter. Zoro?
Alright, I don't have a big point to make here, so let's consider this a mini lesson. I really like that Alvida mentions Zoro here, despite the fact that she has never met him. If you want your players to feel like the world is being lived in, have it react to the player's actions. If your players have a reputation, and a character like Zoro definitely would, he's an infamous bounty hunter. The fact that Alvida knows him and considers him a formidable fighter, despite never having met him, makes the world feel more alive, and it really just makes sense. Of course, a pirate captain would know the name of the strongest pirate hunter in the area. This is one of those small things that DMs often forget to do. Once your players have gotten accomplishments in the world, have people know of those accomplishments. It makes the players feel good, and it makes your world seem reactive. Alright, this will probably be the last lesson for this video. Let's talk about the combat that this episode offers us. From the viewpoint of the anime, this combat does not serve to do anything other than let us know that Luffy is powerful. In universe, there is never a point in this episode where Luffy is challenged in any meaningful way. And that will pretty much persist until the crew gets to Grand Line. And while normally I'm of the opinion that encounters should definitely challenge a player in some way, whether it be an actual mechanical challenge where you're trying to defeat the opponent, or something like a moral challenge, where players must decide whether or not to rescue a hostage or pursue a fleeing foe, or push their skills to achieve both at the risk of accomplishing neither. If a combat doesn't have a meaningful challenge, it can very quickly start to feel like you're just padding for time. However, I think this combat in particular is an exception to that rule, and mostly it's because I buy into this idea that Luffy is a new player. In this scenario, Luffy has just gone through his first session. He hasn't met the rest of his party members yet. I guess the DM would be doing kind of a one-on-one with him to teach him how the game works. And this combat works as a perfect opportunity for Luffy to figure out how the game works. The player slowly starts to use new abilities as he figures out how the character works. This battle essentially serves as a tutorial for the new player. Now, most of the other combats that we get to before Grand Line will not have that benefit of the doubt. I do think a lot of fights in One Piece are dragged out well past the point where they should be, but that's neither here nor there. We're just trying to figure out lessons we can take to TTRPGs. So if you need a lesson here, give new players grace. Let them feel powerful. Don't expect the things that you do for experienced veteran players to always work for new players as well. Sometimes you really need to just let them slowly ramp into things. And if we're going to continue this analogy, One Piece is a very long campaign, and towards the end, you don't have these easy battles. Even battles with no-name Marines start to have higher stakes. So I think Oda very quickly realizes that you can't just have your main characters destroy everything along the entire way and still have a suspenseful show. Alright, that was the first episode of whatever I ended up deciding to call this. I hope it was helpful, and if not, I hope it was at least entertaining. Please comment below and give me advice for what you would like to see out of this series. This is new, and I'm still trying to tailor it to what you guys would like. I don't think in the future I'm going to go episode by episode. That would take far too long if I want to make any actual progress throughout One Piece. Maybe I'll cover entire arcs in one video in the future. I'll figure it out as I go, just based off of what feels right. But in the meantime, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And come back next time as we meet our second party member and talk about what we need in a true TTRPG villain. Bye!